news leader.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Russ Riesinger.
And I'm Jeanelle Slade. Changes made to Montana's Medicaid expansion program last year could be in serious jeopardy.
Similar reforms adopted by the state of Arkansas were rejected last week by a 3-judge panel in Washington, D.C. It's a decision that doesn't bode well for Montana's new rules.
During the 2019 legislature, Montana lawmakers approved new requirements for able-bodied Montanans who get their health coverage through Medicaid expansion.
But as MTN's Jay Cohn reports, it appears those requirements could be shot down before they even take effect.
We're talking about Montana's new community engagement rules that require some Medicaid recipients to put in 80 hours a month of engagement for such things as looking for a job, volunteerism, or going to school. Those new rules were slated to take effect January 1st, but state officials are still awaiting word on whether those requirements will be allowed by the feds. But Billings state lawmaker Bill Mercer, a past Montana U.S. attorney, believes the odds are against it.
These Montana community engagement work requirements haven't gone into effect because they haven't been approved. Now that the court has set aside what was approved for Arkansas, the secretary is going to have to go back and decide, well, can I make findings to approve the Arkansas waiver? And I think our waiver request will be in that same bunch.
Montana Health Department spokesman Chuck Council tells us that last week's decision by the 3-judge panel in the D.C. Circuit applies to federal actions rather than state actions. Quote, "We'll have to wait and see what the decision means for federal approval of Montana's waiver. It would be premature," he says, to speculate what federal regulators will do next. Mercer, though, believes the ruling will directly impact Montana, and a possible appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court is unlikely.
This is one of those 3-judge panels where you look at where the people come from philosophically. It's a pretty balanced panel. The guy who wrote the opinion's a Reagan appointee and known to be a fairly conservative jurist. The other two are Obama appointees, not known to be conservative jurists. And so I think this doesn't look like a great case to go to the U.S. Supreme Court to me.
So it appears likely that Montana lawmakers could be in line for a do-over when it comes to devising possible requirements for Medicaid expansion. Definitely something to watch once the 2021 legislature convenes. In Billings, Jay Cohn reporting for MTN News.
Now, some people question why this 3-judge panel in Washington, D.C. has jurisdiction over Montana's Medicaid expansion rules.
And the lawsuit was filed there because that's where the U.S. Department of Health is located.
New details on a body found at a Billings garbage truck earlier this week. The man's death has now been ruled accidental. The body was identified as 50-year-old Joseph Brown of Billings, the Yellowstone County coroner, and says that Brown died of asphyxia and crushing injuries. Brown's body was found Tuesday morning inside a city garbage truck at the Billings landfill. The death remains under investigation by police.
The temporary ban on e-cigarettes, including vaping products, will continue into April despite objection from many Montana vape shop owners. The Montana Department of Health and Human Services announced in December that the 120-day restriction would take effect on December 18th of last year, after a Montana District Court judge lifted an injunction. So while the ban originally was set to end tomorrow, February 21st, the state argues the injunction filed pushed that back. Now, the temporary ban includes the sale of all flavored e-cigarette products, both in-store and online.
Well, today in Helena, the public weighed in on the proposed updated rules for Montana's medical marijuana system.
As MTN's Jonathan Ambarian reports, a number of marijuana providers voiced their concerns.
On Thursday, several dozen people were on hand in Helena to weigh in on proposed changes to the administrative rules for the Montana medical marijuana program. The Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services says the changes are needed to implement a new medical marijuana law the legislature passed last year. They include overhauling the fee structure and introducing a license structure based on providers' growing space.
The proposed rules seek to continue to strengthen the integrity of the medical marijuana program, as well as implement changes required by law.
But several provisions in the rule proposals drew criticism from those in attendance. One is a prohibition on posting any public information that a reasonable person would believe identified marijuana products or prices. Providers said the rule is too broad and will make it difficult for patients to make informed decisions.
Where people are actively looking and searching for information, they should be able to do that, and we should be able to, as providers, put that information available to the public.
Another contentious change would limit providers to selling CBD products from Montana hemp growers. DPHHS says the rule will ensure CBD products are safe, but providers say it's an unnecessary barrier for their patients.
The CBD products that come in from out of state are federally legal, they're federally tested, and they don't deserve to even be listed in this act. Okay? This is another example of policy being created for some unknown reason that no one can even understand.
Some commenters also had concerns about how the department will determine the limit for how much of a marijuana edible or other product a patient can possess. DPHHS will continue taking comments on the proposed rules through February 28th. Leaders say they'll take everything they hear into consideration before finalizing the rule changes. In Helena, Jonathan Amberian, MTN News.
Now, one of the biggest changes in the most recent law is untethering patients so they don't have to choose a single marijuana provider.
DPHHS leaders say they've been waiting to implement that until the state's tracking system can show whether a patient has bought more than a daily or monthly limit, and that could happen by the end of April.
Well, if you're excited about sports betting in Montana, you could potentially start making those bets as soon as mid-March. The Montana Lottery Commission voted today to approve the kinds of bets people can make and which sports they can bet on. Now, those include basketball, baseball, hockey, football, soccer, tennis, boxing, MMA, golf, motorsports, and Olympics. Approved bets are money line, over-under, in-game betting, parlay, spread, prop bets, and future bets. Now, the lottery expects to begin to place Sports Bet Montana terminals the week of March 9th. Once those terminals are placed and training is complete, you can start betting.
Our plan was always we didn't want to leave any equipment dark, so we weren't going to try to place locations all across this giant state and then leave them there and then turn them on one day. When we're done installing and training, you're selling.
Now, the Montana Lottery will soon roll out its new Sports Bet Montana website. It will show players how they can sign up for the Sport Bet Montana app, and it will have tutorials explaining how each bet works.
U.S. Senator Jon Tester held a summit in Helena today to start getting ideas on how to address what he calls one of the biggest crises facing not only Montana, but the nation, and that's affordable housing. MTN's chief political reporter Mike Dennison has more.
Everyone knows that healthcare costs in America are difficult to afford. But now, Tester says that housing for the average person is approaching the same level.
This isn't unique to Montana. It's across the country. We've got an affordability housing crisis going on right now. I think it already has had detrimental effects upon the economy, on the ability for businesses to grow, on the ability of businesses to relocate to places like Montana.
To evaluate the depth of the problem, Tester assembled more than 20 experts in Helena Thursday on everything from data to banking to home building. They provided some sobering statistics. For example, according to the Montana Budget and Policy Center, 3/4 of Montanans living below the federal poverty line pay more than 30% of their income on rent and utilities. And the average cost of a 2-bedroom rental in Montana is $300 more per month than they can afford. The head of a Missoula Housing Education and Building Group also says affording a home is now even a problem for people with good-paying jobs.
We've seen a trend over time where people that are earning higher incomes are taking our class because they are trying to find an avenue to homeownership.
And a Helena loan officer said house payments are becoming more than many can afford.
We went through the Great Recession and we had the housing bubble burst and a lot of mortgage programs went away. We're seeing those make a comeback. But there's a very big difference between me telling you I can approve you for something and actually having it be affordable in that household.
Tester says the summit gives him ideas he can take back to Washington, but that it won't be an easy problem to solve.
There's no silver bullet here. There's not one single thing we're going to do that's going to fix this problem. I think there's many pieces of this puzzle, and so we need to look at what pieces the federal component can contribute.
Reporting from Helena, Mike Dennison, MTN News.
Senator Tester says he wants to increase the availability of affordable housing across all of Montana.
Well, there's more news from across our state on tonight's MTN 9 o'clock news. The Angel Flight program, which flies rural patients with critical medical conditions to their doctor appointments, is now in need of some angels of its own in the form of pilots. Join me for that and more on tonight's statewide news on the CW.
But first, still to come on tonight's 5:30 news, from farming equipment to farm animals and everything in between. We're going to take you to this year's Mate Show.
And later in sports, she sat out her final high school year, but Cola Bad Bear is back as a force on the court with the Cats. We'll catch up with the former senior star.
And coming up in weather, I hope you enjoyed today because it looks like we're going to continue to see this mild weather pattern stick around at least into the weekend and maybe cool back down next week with snow. We'll have more about that coming up in a few minutes.
You're watching MTN News with Janelle Slade and Russ Riesinger. Storm Tracker weather with Bob McGuire. And sports with Scott Green. This is the 5:30 news on Q2, Montana's news leader.